be with us in our continued journey in the second Sunday of Lent. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Please be seated. So on this, equipment challenges sometimes. On this second Sunday of Lent, we have these wonderful readings around the covenant that is inaugurated with Abram and Sarai, and that covenant with God, and why that it is such a unique and important innovation in the faith system that we have inherited, part of our legacy. So first of all, to remember that Sarai and Abram came from down by Euphrates in the interior. And as they left, and the reason they left was Abram's vision that God was calling them to a new land. Didn't know exactly what this voice was all about. Was a population and a religious tradition that was polytheistic, and his father had been born and lived and died at so this is a family generational tradition that Abram is called to leave behind. So not only is he leaving behind this strong tradition, he's leaving behind his family, his roots, belief system, all of it, in this sort of giant trust exercise into the desert, because he's called initially to go to Egypt. And in that journey, as we know, there's this whole continued sort of experiences that they were having of this new voice, this new and different God. Instead of being many kinds of gods and goddesses, it's one united voice. And then they have this event that we just read in the Old Testament reading, where in this symbolic way, Abram is making a covenant with God. And the reason they're doing that as sort of a pact through this symbolism of offering and sacrifice is that God and Abram had this little conversation at the beginning that said, Abram says, gosh, I don't have any real heir that's of my own issue, and I've gone on this huge trip, and I made all these sacrifices and trusts, and nothing's going to come of it, is essentially what he says. And God says to him, don't despair, I'm going to make your generations to come from you more multiple than the stars that you see. So Abram says, okay, I'll trust you, I'll believe that, and here's my proof. So he basically does something that equivalent today would be a very, very expensive thing to do. Does this thing. In the midst of an experience of not having much, he does this extravagant thing. And God, in these symbols of crossing between these two paths and sacrifices, is showing that this is holy. God is sort of the symbol for us is that God is saying, yes, okay, you're ready to make this covenant, I'm ready to make this covenant too. So they enter into this new relationship. And very formally, Sarai and Abram have moved from this polytheistic belief into a monotheistic belief. It's a tremendously huge deal in the whole history of religious development. And then from there, we have this story that I find very interesting compliment, that it is St. Patrick's Day. And as I was thinking, is there a way to weave that in? I found a very particular river that connects these things to me. But to understand that is to take a moment to talk about St. Patrick and who he was. And St. Patrick is known as the patron saint of Ireland, bringing the Christian tradition in those days, really enough to be called the Celtic Christian tradition specifically, to Ireland. But he is not from Ireland. He is not Irish. He has come from Roman Britain. And on the shores of Roman Britain, where he was raised, he lived to be 16 years old before Irish slavers came to his shores and kidnapped him along with many others to be impressed into slavery among the cultures in Ireland. So at the age of 16, he is forcibly kidnapped and taken. And during the 6 years of his enslavement, he becomes culturally proficient in understanding what is the religious traditions that again are polytheistic, that are there, that have gods and goddesses, that have a very earth-centered kind of spirituality to them. And he is also at the same time becoming fluent in the Gaelic language that's there. So he, however, was raised in that Roman Britain under Christianity. And his grandfather was a priest, and his father was a deacon. He, as a teenager, I'm sure you guys can identify, but as a teenager, had not much use for Christianity and his family's tradition. Wasn't interesting, didn't have a lot of belief in that. It's totally fine. But once he gets into this experience of being alienated from his family, of being taken away from everything he knew and plopped down into a people in a language he doesn't know, in a very frightening situation in which he is enslaved, his faith becomes the very thing that helps sustain him through that experience. And he becomes much more interested in a relationship with God as something that helps him in that experience. But I think also it connects him to the people he's alienated from, his family, and his father and grandfather. And so that helps him feel close to them in the midst of these 6 years in which he is a shepherd and dealing with animal husbandry for other people. And after the 6th year, he has an opportunity. He hears a rumor, he's told, that there is a ship that is going to sail from Ireland back to Roman Britain, and he could possibly be on it if he gets there in time before it leaves. But where it's leaving from is 200 miles away from where he is. So he has to get there fast before the ship leaves, and he escapes and makes his way that 200 miles to where the ship is leaving. And then he gets there and tells the captain, please take me, I want to go back home. And they have this whole argument in which he's not going to be allowed to get on the ship. And he's turned away. And as he's walking away, devastated, 2 of the other sailors come and get him and say, we'll stow you away, you'll be all right. We'll help you out. And from that experience, he's adamantly against enslavement. And really has a lot to say about that. When he goes back home, he's very changed. He's in his 20s by now. And he's very much wanting to continue this faith relationship that he's developed with God. And so his family sends him to seminary, if you will. They teach him. And in those days, it wasn't you go someplace, it was an oral tradition in that particular country. So he's taught. And not only is he taught and he's ordained a priest, he has a vision that God is calling him back to Ireland to bring Christianity to the Celts. And he understands the language. He knows now what the religion is that they have. And he begins to sort of translate in his mind what would it take for them to understand this religion and to convert. So they make him a bishop or a primate so that he can go and bring Christianity as a missionary bishop to Ireland. And that's what he does. But he doesn't go just anywhere in Ireland. He goes to Armagh. He goes to the most powerful central location in Ireland, which, because it's known as the political and religious center where kings are made. And kings are also sort of the religious leadership as well. And so he goes to Armagh and sets up a missionary set of buildings and a school, and begins to convert both people from the royal families and the countryside. But he gets in trouble, he gets beat up a lot, because one of the traditions among the Celtic Irish was that you would ally yourself through with potential people who were powerful if you could maybe marry them off to your daughters, or of course daughters in Ireland had to be willing, they had a lot of power. And so you'd be trying to find a woman that in your family line to marry them into, you would try to adopt them, you would give them symbolic gifts so that those symbolic gifts would adopt you. Well, Patrick was very familiar with that, and he refused all the gifts that were offered to him because he did not want to be adopted into that system. His identity was British, was over here, and he wanted that identity, and that was essential to him. Even though he was in a foreign land, He understood that his ability to sort of teach them and be with them and make real transformation was dependent on his willingness to be an alien in a foreign land. Now, 2,000 years of Jewish diaspora later, and the Jewish people find themselves in a similar position with Israel. The idea of Israel. Abram and Sarah are not indigenous to Canaan or Egypt when they go there. When God promises to Abraham, Canaan will be your promised land, he's essentially saying to the Canaanites, the indigenous people, it's okay to get rid of them. That is how it's understood for several centuries to justify the ongoing battles and wars with the Canaanites, the indigenous people. That same justification was used when Europeans came to these shores and began to colonize these shores. They had a Christian doctrine that said, and was blessed in papal bulls, y'all Europeans that go and find new places to be, if they are not owned by other Christian princes, they're yours. And if there happen to be human populations there that are indigenous to those lands, and if they will not convert to Christianity, you can kill them. And the papal bulls say that. You must convert them or kill them. And everything that's there is yours. When the state of Israel is something that kind of comes out of, again, a very colonizing worldview and influence from Europe, the indigenous people who are there are Palestinians. The Israeli people understand that, quote, my father is a wandering Armenian. That is in the Torah. My father is a wandering Armenian. It refers to Abram. That Abram came to that land as an immigrant. And so what does it mean to make claims to the land when you're an immigrant? And whose land is it? Ultimately, all the midrash of rabbis, all the reflection of post-colonialism, as Christians, we would say, the land must be understood as belonging to God. And the people of the land, whoever they are, indigenous and immigrant, are people of God. God has made people in God's image. If we understand that the people and the land are God's, that our identity is to be rooted in the place from which we came, it brings us to a moral or ethical principle of how we are to welcome the stranger and to be willing to be vulnerable to be the stranger ourselves. To trust in where we go. On Friday of this past week, people who came from many nations over the past years, some of them have lived in New Zealand for 30 plus years, who came to New Zealand from places like Turkey and Bangladesh and India and Indonesia and Jordan and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Syria, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, who've lived as migrant people in New Zealand, to see it as a place of safe harbor, a place in which they could worship and be freely, were gunned down in 2 mosques by a white Australian shooter. 50 people were killed, 50 more were injured, 17 of them critically. That, for us Americans, may not seem too new. Because for us, we began to recognize the phenomenon of mass shooting in our country in 1966. When a student at the University of Texas went up into the clock tower and began picking off people on the ground one by one, killing 17 people. 1966. Since 1966, when we even take mass shooting at its most close and small bracket of definition, of killing 4 people or more in a single event by a single shooter. This country, since 1966, has had 162 mass shootings. just by that definition. 1,153 people have been killed. The rest of the world looks at us with great appall, but then in this circumstance is looking to us to understand how to survive it. Because in New Zealand, it has never happened before. It is brand new to them, and they are devastated. And the Muslim community across the world is devastated. And this is when we must use the language of recognizing our Muslim brothers and sisters as brothers and sisters, and the Jewish people as our brothers and sisters, and Christians of other denominations as brothers and sisters. Because we all can claim that our father was a wandering Armenian. Our father, Abraham, our mother, Sarah, were the wandering people who came from their own home. And God said, this is your promised land. Does not making that promise does not mean that we are then bound and able and enabled to slaughter the people we find there. It means that we are called by God to figure out how we have that relationship, because we are all God's people and we are on God's good earth. In this journey of Lent, the promise that God has made for us is that there is a place for all of us here. That each of us hold within us the light of God. That each of us must be for one another that light in times and places of great darkness, just as St. Patrick understood. Just as the saints from so many countries, even some of the very countries of people who were killed, come from today. Saints all over the world of the three great Abrahamic faiths can say, my father was a wandering Aramean. With that common lineage of faith, I pray that this Lent may be for us a time when we can reach out to our Muslim communities, to our Jewish communities, and to one another. To understand that the fullest way that we can enter into the promised covenant with God is to do the covenant that Jesus invites us into. A covenant we celebrate every time we break bread and share the cup of wine. It is a covenant of love. A covenant that is symbolized in Christ's own sacrifice. One that reminds us in the very words that we institute that Christ died. He died as a victim of violence because he was different. He makes a comment about being outside of Jerusalem, and that's the safest place to be. But he goes into Jerusalem because that's the most needful place to be. And that is the journey we are invited on to make, and the one we're asked to reflect upon how we will make. Because the Holy Week is not just about a once-upon-a-time man named Jesus. It's about the phenomenon of love that resides in our hearts as Christians. We must make that journey in our time.